Nashville. How many of you have been to the Tennessee State Library and Archives? Good. If you haven't, take yourself down there because it is an amazing one. And I just agreed that it's probably the best in the nation. So if you come from a Nashville family, go down and give it a try. Anyway, without further ado, Dr. Wayne Moss.
Thank you, Jean, and thank you all for coming out today. We must have a bunch of retired folks here today, including myself. I worked for 35 years at the State Library and Archives, and for a historian, it was like working in the candy store. It's an amazing resource, collections that I think are, as Jean said, some of the richest. I had occasion to see and visit a lot of other state archives, and ours is really one of the best. But I'm not sure why exactly, but I think it's much underutilized, even by historians. People will find, researching subjects that I know there's a lot of material there and they've never been there. So I would encourage you, particularly since what I'm going to talk about today is not by any means a finished subject. It's one that I got into in the course of a larger project. I had the good fortune to be commissioned by Trey Hargett, the Secretary of State, to write a book on our state capitol building. And it was a real labor of love. I worked for 35 years across the street from that building and saw it many afternoons in the golden sunlight coming off that limestone. I've always loved that building. So to have the opportunity to really dig into its history, the architecture, the people who built it, how it came to be built and modified over the years was a real privilege. And so that book was the result, but I was obliged to write a general history of the building and, as I say, how it came to be built the way it was. But in the course of that, I came to find a lot of material that related to a subject that is not usually well documented, and that is the ordinary workers and craftsmen and people who built the building, not William Strickland, the architect, not Samuel Morgan and the commission, the people who guided the project, but the ones who actually did the work. And I think that subject is what I'm going to talk to you about today, and I think it bears much closer study and something that I have not been able to do. One reason why this project, the building of our state capitol, is uniquely situated to be a study of the laborers and workers who built it is because of the documentation that exists at the state archives. There's a record group on Capitol construction that is incredibly rich. The commissioners, Morgan and John Bass, William Nichols, the guys who guided this project over the years, they were, in good Tennessee tradition, tight-fisted, penny pinching. They wanted everything documented, and all that documentation, those records are all at the archives. So not only, more general supplies and resources, but the payroll records and the individuals who did the work are all named. Their pay is cited. The payrolls are complete. And this is a large-scale infrastructure project that lasted for 15, 16 years. So you get a span of time from 1845 to 1861 where everybody who works on it is documented and named, and it's just an exceptional, archivally speaking, exceptionally well documented, and we don't have that for a lot of other projects. You can look in vain, for road builders from the 19th century, and they're very, very hard to find the names of anybody who worked on these canal and road projects, for instance. But this capital project was the biggest infrastructure project in Tennessee history until the State Highway Department in the 1920s gets going. And of course, we all know today that building roads is what Tennessee state government is about. The TDOT, the successor to the Highway Department, is the 900-pound gorilla of Tennessee state government. But before that starts in the 1920s in Austin Peay's administration, this capital project was the biggest thing that the state had ever undertaken to build. This is just an example of the types of records that we have for this project. And this is an extraordinary two-page document because the 56 or so names on here, these people are enslaved individuals. The first, I don't know, 12 or 13 belong to a guy named A.G. Payne. And Payne is a contractor. He's a labor contractor and owns brickworks. And he is real interested in this project because he anticipates a lot of bricks are going to be needed. It's the same reason that Samuel Watkins is very much involved in this project. He owns brickworks too, and these guys are looking at the main chance. They see an opportunity to make a lot of money on this big project, the building of the Capitol. But Payne also, we know from this document, is a slave owner, and these first 14 or 15 individuals he owns these individuals. They all have the last name of Payne. What was more interesting to me were the other names on here. Now these individuals all have first and last names, and some of them undoubtedly are hired from their masters. Payne does that transaction and gets the use of their labor, and then he in turn is paid by the state. But I've always thought some of the individuals toward the end of this particular record may be free African Americans. This is part of the unanswered question that I have with this project. I'll just tell you that when the book was published, a colleague and I, Susan Knowles, started digging into the labor records in this. We were both interested in it. We wanted to pull together all of these type of records and try to figure out who these people are. And that was in the winter of 2020, and COVID comes along, and we had gathered a lot of material, but it cut that project off, and I haven't gone back to it. And so what I'm suggesting to you today is that there's a lot of unfinished work, and this is really just the tip of the iceberg for this project. So, as I said, the largest construction public works project yet undertaken in Tennessee. Tennessee, again, in the best tradition of our state government, is trying to do things on the cheap. Their first appropriation for this project is $10,000. And a lot of that goes to Payne, who marshals these enslaved individuals and possibly others to do the leveling off of Capitol Hill, blasting out of this Cathy's limestone that forms the top layer and creating the perches on which the building will sit. And he's been commissioned by the legislature and the commissioners to build an all-stone building. So he's building something very much akin to a Greek temple. It's all 2-3 ton ashlar blocks sitting stone on bedrock. And so weight management and dealing with the weight of this thing is a big challenge, but Strickland is the right guy for it because he's built stone buildings before. He's built something called the Delaware Breakwater, which involved hundreds of tons of stone to build a breakwater out into Chesapeake Bay. So he knows how to quarry and move stone. So, you know, the Nashville leaders, guys like Morgan, John Bass, Nichols, they're bankers, they're wealthy merchants. They've finally got the capital situated in Nashville, and they want to build a grand building. But they have to deal with the legislature because that's where the money's coming from. They're responsible for being stewards of that money. And the legislature, of course, they're from all over the state, and some of those guys literally say, let's build a 2-story frame building, put a fence up and call it a day. They literally say that. But Morgan and these other guys have much grander ambitions. One of the first commissioners is 5-time Governor William Carroll. And Carroll's important because of his political clout. He's also an heir to the Jacksonian political tradition and some would say mafia, but Carroll also is the governor who oversees the building of the state prison. And he does that by promising that the prison and the inmates who are incarcerated there will pay for the project, that he seeks to monetize prison labor and make it pay for itself. And this is also a very long tradition in Tennessee, still doing it today with prison industries. But figuring out how to capitalize prison labor and make it pay, in this case for the main state prison, which is down on Charlotte Avenue, is a very consistent thread in Tennessee history, as I hope to show you. So you've got inmates at the prison who are being trained as quarrymen and stone carvers by staff that's hired by William Strickland. There's a guy named James Berth, and his job is, he's situated down at the prison, and his job is to train these inmates who have no experience into being stonemasons and doing the kind of work that's needed for this building that's going up within sight a half-mile up the hill. They build the first macadamized road to connect the prison and Capitol Hill. That's the first paved road in Tennessee. And conveniently, the quarry is located just across Charlotte, more or less where that little park in front of MLK School, that was the quarry. And the quarry is owned by Samuel Watkins. This is an image of that prison. And this is the building where that work was done. I don't know whether it was done in a central courtyard. They created a stone yard in the main prison there on Charlotte to do all this work with the stone that was coming over from the quarry just down the street. It could even be that fenced off area to the right. That could be the stone yard there. There's some what looks to me like stone inside that, but I don't know that for sure. Watkins Quarry, again, owned by Samuel Watkins, Watkins Institute, and it's a quarry that is the same, we call it today the Capitol Limestone. I believe a lot of this building is built out of it. There's a pile of it off to the side of this visitor center. It's a very interesting stone. Strickland liked it because it was easily carved, and as I'll show you, it had a lot of features when polished that were appealing to him as an architect. What he didn't realize is that it's permeated by phosphorus veining that made it more or less over time dissolve. That's why 90% of the exterior of our state capitol is Indiana limestone today. They had to completely deconstruct the thing in the 1950s and replace that stone because it was falling all over the place. But Strickland didn't know that. There was only one geologist in the state at the time. He probably should have consulted him, but he didn't. So this image to the top left there is actually inside the roof of the Capitol building. I went up there with a photographer, and this thing caught my eye right away because clearly this is a rough quarried stone. And you see at bottom right how the quarrymen work, driving those iron rods into stone, and then they'll break that off. And that's what this huge, that thing probably weighs 7 or 8 tons, extends from the main entablature of the building out over the south portico, and there's one on the other side of the building, but being inside the roof, attic as it were, nobody ever sees it, so they didn't finish it off, but you can still see the quarrying marks there, which I thought were interesting. This is one of the few exterior places on the Capitol where you can still see the original Capitol limestone. It's that beautiful modeled with the patterns. That's the original limestone. That's how you can tell it, as opposed to that fine-grained sort of, you know, monochromatic Indiana limestone. It comes from quarries around Bloomington, Indiana. So, I mean, that's a good illustration of the difference in the two stones. So this stone's being quarried at Watkins Quarry, mostly by inmates under some supervision of you know, free craft stonemasons, and then moved a short distance to the prison yard where the inmates are working on it. And these columns that are inside the main hall of the state capitol, the House of Representatives, the big room, those are single piece limestone columns, composite they're called, because of the capitals are kind of a composite of Corinthian and other Greek orders, but they are single pieces of stone. There's what, 16 of them, I think, in that House of Representatives. So this is I like this because it's an example of what James Birth was able to train these guys up to do. I mean, this things are still there. They're beautiful work for you know, men who came to the craft under compulsion. So the prison thing with the prison doesn't quite work out the way that the commissioners hoped it would, partly because all of these laborers, enslaved people, as well as the inmates from the prison, when they were working on site, they had to be fed, clothed, housed. There were contracts to do all that. And just as, you know, what happens after the Civil War, what's happening at this time is that the contractors are always driving down the price. So they're always saying, well, I can feed and clothe these guys for half what you're paying him to do it. So there's a downward pressure on the you know, maintenance of these people to do the work. And the inmates never make money, which is what Carroll kind of promised at the beginning. In 1847, the comptroller of the state characterizes the whole arrangement as a vampire upon the public treasury, because it's just outlays. There's no revenue coming back in from the use of prison inmates. So from his standpoint, it was a failure. But still, you know, the state's getting a lot of unpaid labor there. As I mentioned before, the heavy labor at the very beginning in 1845 is done by Payne and his gangs of enslaved workers whose job is, they use a lot of dynamite. They're blasting off that limestone that lies above the Capitol limestone and creating a level perch on which to sink the foundations of the building. And you know, this kind of labor before the Civil War is just deemed as the proper domain of enslaved people, because it's not, you know, it's not work that white men are supposed to do. I think this is the culture of the day. And Samuel Morgan in 1845 writes an essay in one of the national papers, I think it's the Orthopolitan, where he talks about we need to use more of this enslaved gang labor in our cities, for our industries. This is the right kind of labor to use. So he's an advocate of this, is one of the reasons why he's probably chosen as commissioner. So this is the nature of industrial slavery and urban slavery in large part. There's a lot of hiring out to create larger groups of laborers, and for anything that's industrial in nature, chiefly The iron industry in the Western Highland Rim is almost entirely staffed by enslaved people. So here's that document again, just because I think it's so intriguing. You know, our next step, if we had continued working on this when COVID hit, would be to investigate all of these individuals and find out really who they were and if there are freed as well as enslaved people on this list, and just carry that forward a little bit. Nashville is unusual in the scheme of the South. There have always been a lot of free African Americans in the Nashville community before the Civil War, before they were eventually made to leave just through inhospitable, driven out as the war got closer and closer. But this list and others like it, I think, are particularly important and intriguing for further research. Already covered that. This is, I like this shot. It's taken inside the sort of foundation walls of the state capitol. And you can see that sort of blue-gray Cathy's limestone is the bedrock up there. And it's different from the gray Capitol limestone that they actually built the building out of. But these walls are 8 feet thick. They're enormous things because they're building a stone building and they're putting a 4,000-ton tower on top of the ashlars of the main structure. So this floor plan from Habs in the 30s shows you, if you note the thickness of those walls on the north and south ends, and then under the porches at the east and west side, those things are the 8-foot thick, tremendous weight-bearing walls. And those are the ones where the columns on the porches are. So there's a lot of weight there, and then the other heavy weight is borne by those central piers. Those 4 piers there are very thick, very heavy, and they go all the way to bedrock. And that, in fact, is what's holding up the tower. That tower begins there and goes all the way up to the cupola. And aside from that early work in preparing the site, another major role played by enslaved people were the ironwork that's in this building. The state capitol some years ago received an American Civil Engineering Award, a landmark award, as a very special building from the engineering standpoint, and it was because of the ironwork in it. It's because of these iron trusses, and these things are still holding up the roof of the Capitol. That has not changed a bit. I've been up there and walked all through that attic, and it's like a time capsule almost because of this antebellum 19th century ironwork. And it's not just ordinary ironwork either. It's the reason that Civil Engineering Award was given really is because this was the first project that Strickland used this low carbon, corrosion resistant wrought iron. It was a special kind of iron. It wasn't the usual antebellum, porous iron that broke. And this stuff is not exactly steel, but it's on the way to being steel. And that's attested to by the fact that 170 years later it's still doing the job. There's been no change at all. And it was an innovation then, and the engineers have recognized Strickland for using that, even though it's produced in Stewart County at Cumberland Iron Works. And the finial that's on top of the tower is produced at Brennan Foundry, and I do not know, this is some of the ironwork that holds it up right there. That's a good shot of the finial, and that thing is produced right over on 2nd Avenue at Brennan Foundry. It could be enslaved labor there too. I've not researched Brennan Foundry to the extent to know that, but it wouldn't surprise me at all. And of course, when the Civil War starts, they start producing cannon tubes for the Confederacy. But that's an unusual shot. It was done by a drone, and that gives you, they took the thing down 4 or 5 years ago. Some of you may have seen it on the ground. It was quite, you have no idea how massive that Vitruvian scroll along the side, and then the finial as it rises up. Huge pieces of, and again, that's all the original metal still today. So the stonemasons that come to work on the Capitol project, they're almost all foreign born. And that's the other thing that struck me about it, is that most of these guys are immigrants. Mostly Irish, but a smattering of German and French as well. It was necessary for Strickland to have skilled stonemasons on this job. I mean, if you go inside the Capitol, is the best place to see it, and just walk along the corridors or go in the Supreme Court room or any of those rooms and just look at those ashlars and feel the joining. I mean, it's 3/8 of an inch. It's beautiful work. It's still the original work that was done. As long as that stone's protected from rain, it's fine. But the stuff that was on the exterior, that's where they had problems. But the stone inside is a real testament to the skill of the men who worked on it. They had to advertise outside of Nashville. There's some, this is from City Cemetery. One of the leaders of the stone carvers was an Irishman named John Kane, and he died during the project, and they built his memorial, and you can see it in City Cemetery. They even carved the tools of the stonemason's trade on top of his monument, which like good Capitol limestone have eroded away. You can't really make them out very well, but this is the epitaph by the stonecutters of the State House to the memory of John Kane. But on these records, these are payrolls for stonemasons. You can see the different types of work. There's setters, there's riggers. That guy Frederick Smith there is a sailor. We happen to know that he was in the maritime trades, and Strickland is getting the spars and the materials with which to build the cranes that lift. I mean, each one of those ashlar blocks is 2 to 3 tons, so he's got to lift them up higher and higher as the building goes up. And then when he gets to the tower, although he's dead by then they have to put a crane on the top of the walls that will then lift that stone up to the tower where they're putting it together. But all of which is to say that there was need for men who understood rigging and the kind of cranes that would have been used in New Orleans to get cargo from the ship to the dock and vice versa. So you got setters, riggers, stone layers, brick layers, and then stone dressers. And that dressing part is one of the high skill parts of the stonework that they needed the masons for, because to get that stuff fitting really tightly together with a minimum of mortar and looking fine, it had to be dressed and polished. You didn't want, it's not exterior stone, it's the walls of these chambers, the Senate chamber, the House chamber, all those rooms are, you know, bare stone walls, so they have to look good, and that fine ashlar jointing and polishing was really a craft union thing. And the craftsmanship is also needed on the tower in particular. You can see this is Strickland's model of the tower that's in the museum, or it used to be. I mean, it's still in the museum, but they used to have it on display, not anymore. But this is what he built to show the legislature what he was going to do, made it out of wood. But you can see those piers that I spoke of, the 4 piers, they go all the way to bedrock, they come up, you get that rusticated stair-step square tower in the middle, and then it goes up to a circular tower with half columns. It doesn't look exactly like that model because every other window is filled in with stone, and that's the part that they needed real stonemasons for, because you're dealing with circular blocks there. If you look at the cupola on our Capitol, it's a circular stone structure, so that's a little harder than knocking out square ashlars. And the other part that took skilled stone masonry is the interior marble work. This was done by a first-generation Irishman, James Sloan. He gets his marble from East Tennessee. The red marble comes from Knox County. He uses black, white marble, beautiful stone. And if you go in the Senate chamber, which I think is the finest room in the place, it's full of marble. And that was all Sloan and his masons' work. Strickland dies in 1854, and Morgan takes over the project. And the first thing he's confronted with is a walkout by his masons, because you know they're working on the tower. They realize they're in a strong position, and they don't like the competition from the prison inmates. They're saying, look, this is skilled work here. This is what we do. You know, you can't be undercutting us by having inmates in the prison do this work, and they walk off the job. And Morgan's, you know, kind of been stuck because the tower work has begun. And also, the governor of the state then is Andrew Johnson, which about the only good thing he ever did was he was very pro-labor. He's very, you know, on the side of mechanics. And that was one of his, he's hammering the same message home. He's saying, look, these guys are free men doing good work, and we need to pay them accordingly. And combined with the press, who also gets on the side of the stonemasons, Morgan has to give in, and they get a raise, and they get certain exclusive rights to work on this. Nashville Stonecutters Association wins that labor dispute. They get a raise and reserved work. So again, on this particular document, you can see, you know, that a lot of these stone guys with Irish names are getting paid to come from Cincinnati and Louisville to work on the Capitol. So, you know, Morgan has to go out of state because he doesn't have the indigenous craft union skill stonemasonry that he needs at this point. So they're having to pay more. They're not using enslaved workers and prison inmates in the latter stages in the 1850s. This is just as far as Sloan's work with the marble, this is a nice engraving of a East Tennessee marble quarry, and that's where that stone is coming from. It's made possible. Sloan is able to undercut all his competitors with this marble work because he's digging it out of these quarries in Knox County, Granger, and Hawkins, and then taking it by river downstream to Chattanooga. And guess what's completed at that time in Chattanooga? The Nashville and Chattanooga Railroad is in business, so then he ships it on to Nashville from Chattanooga. And I mean, his estimate for all that work, and if you go to the Capitol and just, you know, go from the rostrum in the House of Representatives to the entire Senate chamber to the balustrades on the grand staircase, it's all this beautiful marble. And he did all that for $12,000. I mean, that was his bid. Or his workers did it for that much. So the railroad is clearly the wave of the future in these big projects of moving materials around. We think he had his stone yard right across from downtown Pres Church. This is a letterhead from one of his letters, and you know, you can see he advertises it as a steam marble works, which means he's using technology. He's using steam engine to cut stone, which is another reason why he's probably able to do it cheaper than anybody else.
So would that be on Market Street where the row of warehouses is now? Market Street second.
Yeah, well, that's what the letterhead says. There is a stone yard across from downtown Presbyterian, but it may well not be Sloan's. I really don't, I haven't researched exactly where this is, but Market Street, yeah, would suggest that he's right on the river, which makes sense if he's getting stuff off of the railroad or steamboats. This is just some of the work in the Senate chamber, which is smaller and completely furnished with this marble. This is the red marble from Knox County. The capitals on those Ionic columns are white marble, I think from Granger. The base pedestals are black. The plinths are black marble. This is some of the other work that's been restored there. Even if you look in the House of Representatives there, the rostrum, what's left, they got rid of the marble work and put in a wooden rostrum up there, and they also took a white marble eagle and painted it with gold paint. So you see that gold eagle, there's marble underneath there. Hard to account for taste. And this is the grand staircase with all of those red marble balustrade and newels. That's one of Strickland's nicer touches on the interior.
What did they pay those stonemasons?
Well, it's on some of those documents. I think it's about $250 a day. If I'm not mistaken, they were getting $225 a day and walked off for a raise, which they got an extra quarter. So that's, and those are elite, craft union people. They have probably one of the first unions in Tennessee with that Stonecutters Association. So I think partly as a result of that labor dispute, Morgan starts looking for alternatives because he needs a lot more stone. Even after the building itself is nearing completion with the tower, the Capitol building sits on a huge pedestal with terraces and steps. It creates this rising effect that's one of the building's charms. I mean, just imagine what that thing looked like in the 1850s. Every soldier that comes down here from Illinois or Ohio comments on that. I mean, it's like this grand structure, partly because it's a perfect site. And the way Strickland built it, it sits on a big pedestal. It just rises higher and higher. And then with the cupola and tower, it's really was a stunning sight then and still is today if you can find a view shed to see it through all the new buildings. But Morgan starts looking for other ways to cut stone besides paying these guys what he's paying them. And so the flagstone for the steps and terraces are supplied by a mechanized outfit that's initially run by Adolphus Hyman, who was a Nashville architect. He actually submitted a bid to be the architect for the Capitol, but they wanted Strickland. They wanted a Greek temple style building, and Strickland was the man for that. That was his forte, and I don't think they really ever considered any of the other prominent architects. There's a guy from Louisville, Shryock, and Adolphus Hyman. But Hyman comes back on the project with this steam-powered stone cutting machinery and mechanized rubbing equipment to, again, do that polishing that the masons had to do before. This is a look at such a piece of equipment. It's just run off a steam engine. And it cuts stone, and they needed a lot of flagstone. Next time you go up to the Capitol, just note that as you ascend the steps and walk out onto those broad terraces, before you ascend more steps up into the building, lots of flagstone. I mean, an enormous amount of stone was needed. And so this, financing the Capitol, I think Strickland and Morgan had an understanding from the very beginning. Strickland gave an estimate to the legislature that he would build this thing for $300,000. And he knew that wasn't going to happen, even in 1845. But he knew who he was dealing with. I mean, these are people who are giving him $10,000 to, you know, get started. So he made a comment later in life to someone on the street that was reported in the papers that he knew that the estimate was low, but it was the only way the project was going to get off the ground. And eventually, according to Morgan's best accounting, they spend $1.2 million by the time of the Civil War, when the finishing touches are being put on the building itself. And that's aside from landscaping, any of that work on the grounds. $1.2 million, that's a considerable expenditure for an antebellum state legislature. And they only do it because it's an inflationary decade. Prices of everything are going up, and the state is doing very well. You have to remember that Tennessee, from 1845 to 1860, this is its heyday. It's really the golden age of our state. In terms of political clout, you got 3 presidents during that period. And not just presidents, you got vice presidents, secretaries of state, leaders of the armed forces. I mean, Tennesseans are all over in the highest echelons of government. And it's not just political, it's economic power. The state is much more important economically before the Civil War than it becomes afterwards. It's an agricultural powerhouse. It's got that iron industry in the Western Highland Rim that after the war, it could have stayed here, but instead, for various reasons, it migrates down to Birmingham. Those guys are all Tennesseans that established that iron and steel industry in Birmingham. So, I mean, Tennessee is a economically diverse powerhouse. And so Morgan's got money. I mean, the comptrollers are swamped with tax receipts that are coming in because of this. It's an inflationary decade and the state's economy is very, very strong. So he can afford to these rising costs. And the legislature gets on board too. They start appropriating first $150,000, then $200,000. They start giving, last year Strickland's life, they give him more money than he asked for. So things have changed quite a bit. And the other reason they can do that is because of the state bonds. This is a new innovation. That's a picture of $1,000 state bond where instead of giving money directly to the project, the state sells these bonds to investors and promises to pay a certain rate of return on them. And this is an innovative financial technique for Tennessee government. And it's very successful because banking is growing, there's a lot of capital to be invested, and this is how they finance the end of the state capital, by selling state debt, basically, which is what a bond is. And our bonds are still, you know, what do they say, gilt-edged, which I, as a state of Tennessee retiree, am very grateful for. I mean, Tennessee bonds are very strong, and they make sure, Doug Henry and others over the years made sure that they stayed that way. So Morgan can be extravagant, and you see this in the latter stages of the Capitol construction. He starts furnishing the interior with all kinds of, you know, bells and whistles that are maybe not in keeping with Strickland's original thought. I mean, Strickland is a Greek revival guy. He's got this idea of a kind of austere interior with marble furnishings for a show, but Morgan starts buying these gazeliers or gas chandeliers. They have that building drilled out for gas. I mean, you got gas lights there in 1860. That's pretty innovative. And the wrought iron work that's in the state library in particular, if you really want to see Morgan with free reign when he becomes the architect, in effect, after Strickland's death, go to the state library room and look at that thing and just note how different it is from the rest of the building. I mean, he has fresco work. He's got these German plaster guys coming in and doing elaborate work. And, you know, the legislature's giving him money, and bonds are there to finance all of this skilled work. So there's one of the gazeliers. There's still 3 or 4 original ones, including the one in the state library. Of course, they're not gas anymore, they're electrical, but they're still the original. I mean, they were gilt brass, and you can see up top some of that work on the ceilings. Here's a shot of the State Library. I mean, this is one critic called it a sort of Rococo thing that I don't know that Strickland, I mean, left to his own, you know, if he lived, I doubt would have done anything like this. But Morgan is having the ceilings plastered and frescoed and buying all this wrought iron from Philadelphia. The gas chandeliers come from Philadelphia. I mean, he's going to the best northern manufacturers to buy the stuff at the end of this project. He's a merchant, you know. His place, he's just built his own building on the public square, and his specialty is interior furnishing. So he's kind of in his element. It's like somebody being given a blank check to decorate the Capitol, which is what he did. So the main point that I want to make about all of this is that this Capitol project really gives us a preview, a test bed, as it were, for post-war convict lease labor. And some of you may have heard of that, connection with the coal mines and coke ovens in Grundy County or down around Swanee and East Tennessee. But this is a crucial element of the post-war Tennessee economy. Again, frugality, constricted revenues. I mean, Tennessee is devastated after the Civil War. Besides losing tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of individuals killed in the war, starved, whatever, the revenues are really constricted. The tax base is almost non-existent. I mean, Tennessee is a burned over district at the end of the Civil War, particularly west and middle, but east too. I mean, east is occupied by an enemy force for much of the war. So the whole state bears the marks of heavy, heavy devastation, as much as Virginia or any place else. So revenues are really tight. And this antebellum model of leasing prison inmates for public work is quickly resurrected after the war. The end of slavery in Tennessee and the rest of the South precipitates a huge crisis from the standpoint of ruling elites. I mean, in agriculture, you go from where enslaved gang labor is powering this economy to new heights based on cotton, corn, other forms of agriculture. Suddenly, these people are free. How do you deal with that? Well, they deal with it in the countryside by figuring out very quickly how to put sharecropping in place. You can see it in archival collections, the Washington family papers from Robertson County, biggest tobacco producers in the world before the Civil War. And in 1867, they're already signing hundreds of sharecropper contracts with their formerly slaves, but they're staying there and they're continuing to work for a share of the crop. And over time, you know, people get in debt. Those people become tied to the land. Now that's in the agriculture. In the cities, it's a different story. It's not an agricultural thing. You can't have sharecropping. And what happens is the state legislature starts criminalizing a whole series of minor offenses. Things like vagrancy, standing in Memphis on a street corner and, you know, a policeman comes along and says, what are you doing here? Where are you from? And you don't have a good answer right away, off to jail. And not just, you know, 30 days for vagrancy or trespassing, same way, petty larceny, you know, maybe steal an apple from a vendor. Those crimes start getting 10 and 15-year sentences in the state penal system. And so you create, it has a double effect. It creates the same, not the same, but a similar African American, they're not enslaved exactly, but they are incarcerated. And instead of, you know, the overseer, you've got prison guards. And these people, you know, from Memphis get shipped off to work in coke ovens for 10 years in Grundy County. This is how, and the state is leasing them to private industry to be, to use as they will. And state guards are managing the system in those prison facilities. So it's a big change, but it is a system that is previewed in the Capitol project. In fact, when they go to landscape the Capitol grounds in 1870, they hire a Knoxville firm, this Cherry and Morrow, to manage the convicts. They're responsible for feeding them, housing them, clothing them, and then they get paid by the state, and that's convict lease labor. The state is leasing them convicts to do their private work for profit as landscaping and it works for the state. It works better than the state having to manage the system. They just get a flat fee from the firm involved, and that firm gets to use inmates as it sees fit. And it's just a clear sort of revenue stream. That's a picture of the Capitol ground. This is what it looks like when the building is completed right before the Civil War starts. It's still basically a construction site all around it. So the first thing they do after the war, Morgan's still around, they bring in this firm to use inmates to start landscaping the thing again. And that really is what the New South is about. It's a merger of formerly enslaved and incarcerated workers in the form of convict lease labor. And the state and local penal systems supply that gang labor for private industry. And it's a revenue stream for the state. And I mean, I've studied this up through to 1930. That's a major source of revenue for the state of Tennessee, is leasing convicts. So it's not just a minor thing. It's a basis of one of the basis of state government revenues, and it gets done away with in the 30s because it's kind of antiquated, and the federal government's starting to put pressure on the states to get rid of this system where they're leasing out their convicts to do work for corporations. But it is predominant in this state until 1930, and you still have a remnant of it today in prison industries. So I've gone on long enough. I'm sorry I left, so there is some time for questions, though. Thank you for your attention.
Mr. Morgan you referenced, is that the person for whom Morgan Park is named? That's in North Nashville?
Yeah,
It is.
I imagine it is. Samuel Dole Morgan, he was a heavy hitter in the Nashville community.
Was he mayor ever?
I don't think he was mayor, but the Capitol project became so important to him that, like Strickland, he's buried in the building. He's on the south side, Strickland's on the north side of the building.
Bob, the original Worthen bag company over there was called Morgan and Hamilton.
So that's the Morgan Park.
Yes.
And I believe he was related distantly to John Hunt Morgan, the Confederate cavalry guy. Yes, ma'am.
Was the Capitol well protected during the Civil War?
Well, it was, yes, because they turned it into a fort. I think they call it Fort Andrew Johnson, but they, from the beginning, time that Nashville falls, they keep expecting a counterattack. They expect the South to make an effort militarily to regain Nashville. So they fortify the Capitol. Images of it, you can see wooden palisades and artillery emplacement all around it. One of the interesting documents that we found when we did looking back at the Civil War in Tennessee was a document in Benjamin Franklin Cheatham's papers at Sewanee at the University Archive, and it's from a rebel sympathizer in Nashville, and he draws Cheatham, who's a corps commander in the Army of Tennessee, draws him a very detailed map of downtown Nashville, because he's like, this is what you need to attack the city. Shows him where all the gun emplacements are along the river and around the Capitol. So yes, they're fortifying it partly because it's the high point of the city, and partly because they want to try to preserve the state capitol from recapture. Yes, ma'am.
Did I miss you talking of or referencing the book?
Yeah, I've tried not to hawk it too overtly, but this is the book. You can get it from the State Library and Archives. They have the remaining copies, I believe. And what I'm particularly proud of are the footnotes here, because they lead you to a lot of this stuff and point the way to further research that I have not done. This is really a provisional presentation, but there's a lot more work there, and the records are there to do it. Yes, ma'am.
In those early days when they were trying to train these convicts to learn a dangerous trade,
Right.
did you see any references to deaths or severe injuries of those?
It's a good question, because the project has always been touted as not having any deaths. Morgan himself.
Capitol.
Huh?
Wasn't that at the Capitol? I was thinking outside.
Well, no, he said the whole project was done without any deaths by workmen, but we found a newspaper notice of an enslaved man being crushed by falling rock in the early stages and then dying later. So that's not accurate.
I mean, I was just thinking, preparations for.
Oh yeah, I mean, very dangerous work, and they're up, on wooden scaffolding, moving 3-ton blocks of stone.
I was thinking just the quarry.
Well, the quarry too. I mean, quarry is one of the most dangerous kind of work there is, I expect.
Tell us the story
David.
about the statues outside the Capitol and why.
Okay, yeah, that's another one of Morgan's extravagances. He buys a lot of stuff from Wood and Perot, a Philadelphia iron works firm. They do the wrought iron railing, the real fancy railing and medallions, and the spiral staircase in the State Library. That's all their work. And they also, one of the last things he bought from them were these, I'm not sure they were bronze because they corroded pretty quickly, but they were statues of half-clad, it was morning, night, and noon, I believe, and they're 3 probably brass, not bronze, statues, and they were a bit of a scandal. But he had them. He had the light fixtures around the Capitol put on. I think there were 4 of these sculptural groups, and they came in for a lot of criticism. And when they started corroding, probably by the turn of the century, they just got rid of them. And there's rumors about them still being around in some cemeteries in Middle Tennessee.
But I thought the real reason they got rid of them, the legislature thought they were indecent.
Well, they were definitely scandalous, and that was Morgan. I mean, that's not that was one of his finishing touches. And the other thing they got rid of was the biggest of the chandeliers was a massive, huge thing that was a centerpiece of the House of Representatives. But it sat right over the legislators, and they couldn't wait to get rid of that thing either, and they finally did. And I mean, that was a huge, impressive piece of work, and they moved that out, I think, by the 1880s or so. What do you think, Kim, about my characterization of the State Library and Morgan's extravagance?
Dead on. And I'm glad you noted that, because Morgan's impact on the building needs to be appreciated, even though I think it's very garish compared to the rest of the building. It just, looks like the interior designer went crazy.
Yeah.
Did you mention what Francis Strickland, what his role was in the Capitol? This is Strickland's son.
Right. His son Francis. I think it's underappreciated. Strickland dies in 1854, and suddenly they're left without an architect. And the work on the tower is just getting underway. And the stonemasons, the more skilled individuals that are doing this work, they beg the commissioners to hire Francis Strickland, his son, to guide the work, because he had been working with his father for some years. He knew the plans. He may have drawn up some of them. He's in his mid-30s, I think, at that point, and so they hire him for less than half of what they were paying his father to be the architect. And as soon as that tower feature is completed, they give him the heave-ho, and he comes back in Chancery Court to try to recoup. He says, this was not right. They didn't pay me for my work. I was working with my dad for years before they actually paid me anything, and it drags on in Chancery, but he doesn't win. But Morgan, I think Morgan's role is hard to overstate. He's as important as Strickland almost, because he sees the thing through, and he also shields Strickland early on when the legislators are trying to clamp down on the money, and they're like, do we really need to pay this guy $5,000 a year, is what they were paying Strickland. And Morgan protects him, and he protects his vision of the building too, because he can. He's the most influential commissioner. He's the head of the commission. Other people come and go, but Morgan stays. And he stays involved with the capital project until his death in the 1880s. And it clearly was dear to his heart. He had himself buried in it, just like Strickland. So.
Thank you
Thank you.
so
Yeah,
much.
my pleasure.